Good afternoon. My name is Dustin Dupas, Chief Operating Officer at Tabs Analytics. Welcome to our second webinar in our 2017 series, where we'll be doing our first ever deep dive into personal care. We'll be covering important consumer, channel, and product trends for many segments within personal care, such as hair care, personal wash, and deodorant. We also have an upcoming webinar on April 19th, our second annual baby care industry survey. Be sure to join us for this fact-filled presentation that will cover 6 categories within baby care. Please check back at our website at tabsanalytics.com for the baby webinar sign-up that will be available next week. Presenting today is Dr. Kurt Jetta, CEO and founder of Tabs Analytics. At the end of the presentation, we'll open the floor to questions that you can submit via the chat box on your GoToWebinar screen. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jetta.
Thank you, Dustin, and I'll also add that for those of you that are on Twitter, you can follow the webinar at hashtag Tabs Analytics. And thanks everyone for attending. As Dustin mentioned, this is the first time we'll have looked at personal care categories, and those would include things such as hair care and deodorant, personal wash, feminine products. As we do with all of our studies, we field surveys to 1,000 adults 18 plus that are demographically representative of the U.S. population. This was fielded by TNS, which is a multinational research firm. The areas of questioning, first of all, we asked about what categories they're purchasing and how often. And so you can see the full list. We were hitting oral care, personal wash, shaving, hair care, which a lot of the purpose of putting hair care in here is to determine, is it beauty or is it personal care? It's kind of it straddles both, and so I'll talk about some of the metrics we look at to see what's the appropriate coding for that type of category. Then we ask, and this, we have for all of our studies, agreement on what deal tactics they use. Do they look for everyday low price, bonus packs, clip Sunday coupons, etc.? We ask strong agreement on 2 trendy topics. This time it's organics and online shopping and research. And then where do they buy personal care products regularly? And by regularly, we define that as 3 or more times per year, so of any of these 16 categories. We don't have specific grocery breaks, but we do break out specific websites as well as Walmart, Target, CVS, etc., a lot of the national chains. As we do for all our surveys, we always want to make sure that what we're reporting is aligned with other data sources we know to be true, so we go through quite a few validity checks, both with internal data validity as well as external, to make sure it corroborates with industry things we know to be true from other industry sources, and I'll point those out as we go along. One of the things we do find is that we do a lot of correlation analysis between purchase frequency through household panel and reported purchase frequency in our survey. So today we're going to review the basics. What are the category trends with demographics, who's buying, and what are their deal preferences? We also look at outlet shopping patterns, and we use a metric that those of you that are new to our webinars might not be familiar with, but it's something we use in pretty much every webinar we do now, is share of mentions. So that is what percent of the people mention purchasing at a specific outlet divided by all of the mentions that are provided for all outlets. And what that gives us is a proxy measurement for market share that correlates very highly to share of occasions that you would see through household panel data. We ask their attitudes towards on-trend concepts, as we just mentioned, organics and online shopping. And then just to note that when I talk about a heavy personal care buyer, we have a point system on basically reported frequency by category, and so we identified 20% of the respondents that account for 55% of the reported transactions across all of these. And so the way our point system works, it really requires a breadth of purchasing versus depth in just a few categories. That would not qualify you as a heavy personal care buyer overall. There will also be times where I'll refer to prior studies, or I won't fully build out or prove a point or something that I'll throw out a fact or whatever. And almost all of these can be verified or validated by looking at prior webinars that we've done, and you can find those on webinars.tabsanalytics.com. So with that preface, here's some of the data. Now, unfortunately, on a lot of these studies that we do on specific categories and sectors, they're not as interesting the first year as they are in future years, where we can look at trends. But this at least kind of will establish kind of expectations, and we can also, again, corroborate the data that we find here with what you would find in household panel data. And so we're looking at which of the categories are purchased by the highest percentage of people. So you see a lot of high penetration categories here. I mean, these are traffic driving categories, bring in a lot of bodies to the store. I mean, there are a few more nichier type categories, a lot of the sanitary protection categories, adult incontinence, some of the shaving categories, but in general, these are, if we divide the world of HVC by personal care, beauty, and OTC or healthcare, these are the categories that are most traffic driving. And in fact, you can see that even more when we ask how many purchases they're making per year. So we look at it two ways. First of all is only among the people that buy, and then on a per capita basis, so we're also weighting the people that don't buy at all. And so you can see some of these categories, particularly the lower penetration categories, have average purchasing of over 4 times a year or once a quarter, more than once a quarter. And so that's something you tend to see is lower penetration categories tend to have higher levels of purchasing or bring in heavier buyers. Now, this also substantiates that point. So what percent of the category buyers are ones that bought at least 3 times? So you can see that sanitary protection, these fem care categories, the majority of their buyers are buying quite regularly. Whereas a lot of these other categories, they're getting a higher percentage of marginal buyers, which from an implication standpoint, there's fewer opportunities to convert people. It means that the initial purchase is usually the most important for them from a shopper marketing perspective, whereas here the other ones that are purchased more frequently, those you can start kind of trying to get at loyalty aspects. And this is then what percent of the buyers of their category buyers would be heavy personal care buyers overall. So this gets to kind of issues about market basket, and so you can see these categories also are bringing in heavy buyers overall. So there's this high market basket potential. Also above average are shaving, disposables, as well as non-disposables, and hair care styling. Would be ones that have a above average level of market basket potential. Then who's buying them? Well, who are the heaviest buyers? And quite a few interesting things here that I'll point out. Well, first of all, we talk about, and the media is absolutely, and the industry now is just obsessed with these millennials, and it's not the vaunted millennials, which I will abbreviate to say VM. They're about at the average, which is 23%, the national average. They're at 24%, but it's really adults 35 to 54 that are the heaviest buyers. And in fact, of all the heavy buying groups, that is the highest. What's the common denominator of people in those areas? Well, they're much more likely to be married and have large households, particularly with older kids. So you can see all those numbers here, 4 to 5 member households with kids, 36%. I found this really interesting, and I can't quite explain why, but very high personal care sales are a high level of personal care buying in the West, South, Central, which is Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma, well above every other region that we looked at. As you would expect, women twice as likely to be heavy personal care buyers as men, 30 versus 14. And then also Hispanics are above average buyers of personal care. But again, I want to just disabuse the notion that millennials are the key to success in this category. As in most industries in CPG or sectors, it's this age range, the 35 to 44. Now, those of you that sat in on cosmetics know that the millennials were extremely important, but that's the exception, not the rule. 35 to 44 is normally the strike zone. There's also this interesting dynamic here where the level of heavy buying actually decreases slightly with higher incomes, and so we're going to pretty granular levels up to 150 and plus. And what we call that is, in economic terms, a declining marginal propensity to consume CPG, and that's a big, big issue in our industry. So there is income gains are not evenly distributed. They tend to be much higher in the most recent years among the highest income individuals. So one of the reasons why our industry is so soft, and in fact historically soft, is because the people that are making the biggest gains in incomes are the ones that show a lesser likelihood to re-spend that in industries in the consumer packaged goods. They tend to spend more on leisure, in durables, and those types of items, electronics. And so that's kind of, this data then corroborates what we're seeing on a much more macroeconomic basis. So where are these buyers buying now? So this is what percent of adults buy at a given outlet at least 3 times, and we see Walmart is the leader at 56%, followed by grocery. So of the 3 sectors I mentioned in HBC, healthcare, beauty, and personal care is by far the one most highly developed in the food channel in grocery. And it has to do with, again, that traffic and the regularity of purchase. Target is also a big area of personal care sales. Dollar stores at 23% is above where you would any of the other sectors we've tracked. Club tends to be lower than we've seen in other sectors. And then we see e-com down here. So only 9% of the American public, of the adults, are buying e-commerce personal care at least 3 times a year. So that's a very low percentage. And that is the totality of the 16. It is not any given category. That is all of them, and only 9% are there. So we're going to then follow that share of outlet mentions methodology and then re-percentage all these mentions to the total. And you can see that Walmart has roughly 20% share of the market, Target at 12%, and Dollar Store, which was at 8%. And again, that's the highest we've seen for any sector. Here's the e-com that everybody loves to obsess about, and they're at 3.1%. Now, that is twice as high as what we saw in consumables, and it fits actually into the framework that I presented at last year's baby care study, and I'll put in a shameless plug for next month's update to the baby care study. And in that, what I proposed is there's a framework for determining the potential of e-com share of total, which was categories that are less frequently purchased and higher average prices would have a higher share of e-commerce. And this certainly then would corroborate that framework. Right now, it's not even a theory just yet. It's more the hypothesis. And as we add more data points, we'll kind of keep seeing if that holds up. But still, e-com is a very small percent, 3%. It's now at meaningful levels, but consider that there's less transactions on all e-com websites than, say, Rite Aid or all of Dollar Store. So still a long, long way to go to be a kind of a meaningful economic force in personal care. As we look at where people are buying, oops, I have a wrong, as I said, a wrong heading there. Hold on, let me go back. Okay, so I'll just talk to it. Sorry about that, these old technical glitches. So ignore up here. I'm going to cross that out and reissue that. But as we look at age by where they shop, so what we can see is Target, look at their sharp decline. I mean, they're getting in the VMs, the vaunted millennials, but they don't really seem to really have they really lose about half their share among older, like the oldest population. In fact, their share among this group, the 18 to 34, is actually right about where Walmart is. What else do we know? Well, the VMs actually have a lower share in e-com than any other age group. So that's not to say in absolute they're low, because we know that they shop in general higher in e-commerce, but just as a share of the total outlets, it's lower. And then they also like the natural foods outlets. So we promised that we would pander to your obsession about millennials, organics, and e-commerce, and I certainly strive to do just that. So as we look at now the share by income, as you would expect, Walmart, dollar stores would be skewing lower income. Now, I found it surprising that we also saw that trend, not nearly as extreme for Walgreens. If we look at who's skewing higher income, Target, I think everybody probably knows that, CVS skews higher income, and Costco. So very real differences by income, which also then would have us rethink, and also as we're talking to our buyers, on how do they think of their competition. Does CVS really compete with Walgreens head-to-head? I know they're the two largest drug chains in the country, but they seem to have a fairly substantial demographic profile. Not to mention the fact that the markets, they don't overlap nearly as much as you would expect given how many stores they have. So this kind of would lead us to just kind of reconsider who really is the competition. Personal care shoppers, they employ a lot of tactics to save money. So about 3.4 on average. We asked 11, and one of the ones we added this time we haven't looked at before is a value brand. So that's one of the tactics that they utilize. And in fact, 90% of the consumers use at least one. So this is, as it always has been, very important driver of consumer preference, and we'll see by outlet and just by brand. EDLP is by far the most utilized of the tactics, and in fact this gap that we see in personal care is much higher here than in any of the other sectors we've looked at. In fact, overall, these numbers are lower than we've seen before, and a lot of the low numbers, look how low private label is, only 28%. Normally private label is a strong number 2 or 3 as ways to get deals in other sectors. They're normally in the 35 to 45, but we can also see that by low private label share in a lot of these categories here: personal wash, oral care, shaving, at least non-disposable shaving, hair care. Private label has very low share, so this is one of those areas where we corroborate the data we get in this study with other sources, in this case Nielsen and IRI, that we know to be accurate and true. So, but in general, I found it very interesting. Personal care just has lower deal participation overall than other sectors that we've looked at. That's not to say it's low in the absolute. It's still 3.4 tactics consumers are using regularly, meaning they strongly agree, not just marginally or occasionally. I mentioned value brands, and that really plays a major role in a lot of categories. When we talk value brands in hair care, we would be talking about Suave or VO5 or White Rain. In oral care, that would be AIM or Pepsodent. So those types of categories. In personal wash, we might be Zest or Dial, I guess, is toward the value end. Look at if any of these retailers, most notably Walmart, but there's other retailers. Why is dollar store growing? Why am I losing sales to dollar stores? Well, look no further than this response here on value brand purchasing and the importance of value brands in their role in where they choose to purchase personal care. Look how much dollar stores, so 44% of people that buy in dollar stores say value brands are important to them, as compared to all adults, only 26%. So that really is kind of, if you want to start a strategy to stem the bleeding to dollar stores, First tactic number one, and this is a slam dunk, is look at your assortment of Suave and VO5 and AIM and Pepsodent and Close-Up and all those other value brands that have pretty high awareness and pretty strong velocities and sales. Now here's the one, the deal tactics by age, and this is some pretty interesting information. So I disparage the millennials and the obsession with millennials quite a bit. But here's a chart, though, where you can kind of start understanding why there is such an interest, and it gives us a glimpse into the future of what the world looks like once millennials now start becoming the bigger economic force in the 35 to 54 age range. And the biggest thing here is FSIs and circulars. They have a real efficacy problem among younger shoppers, so not just millennials, but even the 35 to 54. I mean, this is a dramatic level of differentiation between people that say they use FSIs, here's the younger, and the older. I mean, these tactics are kind of aging out. Circulars, I mean, this is the first time, in fact, circulars have underperformed loyalty programs in our research, and we've done over 10 studies on this. And circulars have always been substantially above loyalty programs. This is the first time. So the red line here is the overall. That's 32 versus 30. So statistically equal, but just the fact that it's directionally above, I found to be pretty meaningful. And also what's really, I think, problematic, and problematic if you accept the premise, which I've proven on multiple occasions, that more deals equal to higher sales. If there's not anything to replace these deal tactics among these younger shoppers, that means they're not going to be participating in deals as much, and that means that's going to result in continued softness in some of our sectors. And here you can see this shop for deals. I like to go to different stores to get the best deals. Again, that's a very age-driven dynamic. You can see the young slackers here, even the 35 to 44 slackers. So it's not just the millennials all lying on the couch doing nothing, refusing to clip coupons or do what it takes to save money. It's even the the families, the 35 to 44 age. Then if we look by income, there's a pronounced dynamic as we look by income, and we also look at these what we call passive tactics. I don't have to do anything to get the deal. I just show up and I get I get to save money at the shelf. And you can see that on the passive tactics, that's where the skew toward lower income is most pronounced. So private label, value brand, and of course EDLP. And it's very interesting that we see this continued spike, not among the lowest income, but about that kind of 30 to 50. I mean, the total, like, classic blue collar demographic. They're the ones that are kind of looking for any advantage they can get to save money. Their incomes really haven't increased over the last 5 years, and so we can see that they're the ones taking, doing things or taking steps and employing tactics to save money. Here's the active, and that's, you can see FSI also and circular also correlated with income. Now, why understanding its importance in deal activity and deal offers is we see Walmart sacrificing their #1 share position among heavy deal buyers. So let's just look at heavy buyers overall, not deal buyers. So we can see Walmart among heavy buyers, at 20% of the people doing 55% of the transactions, still #1 and a clear #1, but not as high as their national average. Same with food. And where is kind of who's disproportionately benefiting from the heaviest buyers? Well, beauty and natural food. I mean, one thing that's interesting, and I'll probably make this comment even, you'll see it even more pronounced, is that heavy buyers just like to buy stuff. So the more stuff you offer and the more places you offer to have it that they can buy stuff, they're going to buy. And so that's why kind of all these major initiatives on cutting back SKU count and assortment, and that really never seems to work, because heavy buyers just like to buy stuff. But let's look at how that Walmart's share really suffers among the heavy deal buyers. So this is about 25% of the universe that accounts for roughly 45% of the transactions. So they skew heavy buyers, but they are not the heavy buyers. look how much lower that share goes. In fact, their share among the light deal buyers is about 24. So that's roughly a 40% drop in their share. Food is actually the #1 outlet among heavy deal buyers, although that is even underdeveloped among versus their national average. So where do the heavy deal buyers migrate to in disproportionate numbers? That's CVS, that's Walgreens that have the active deal tactics, the circulars, the loyalty programs, the digital couponing, etc. And then also dollar stores that we've seen are the value brands in particular. I mean, that's a really big swing for dollar stores, 8.1 versus 9.5. That's the biggest swing of all of them here. And a big driver of that is the value brands, but it's also just the fact that they do other types of deal tactics as well. Walmart kind of just mails it in after the EDLP. They're going to continue to mail it in, and they're going to continue to sacrifice and see that opportunity cost. There's just such low-hanging fruit if they would just get off of that a little bit, because I mean, in the instances where I have seen them promote, they do just as well as any other retailer generating incremental sales. In fact, they promote up in Walmart. Sales do great. So here's hoping that they can jumpstart their business by just reorienting themselves there. I'm not going to hold my breath though, of course. So if we project how big the personal care market is, we're putting it at about $40 billion. And so the way we get to that is we look at the Nielsen IRI universe. We project out the universe based on our share of mentions methodology. We also overlay some estimates on average transaction size. And so we're at about a $40 billion market. E-com then is only about 3% of that. They're about 1.2 billion, and that's across all of personal care. So I've had clients tell me their particular categories are, oh, it's $1 billion. That's not happening. It's not $1 billion for your category. There's only a little over $1 billion being done in personal care overall, and the dominant players are Amazon, Walmart, and Target. One of the things we see a lot of these specialized websites, and none of them really registered on our research. So it was really kind of the big three. More than half the people in personal care don't buy anything online. So I mean, there's just a whole general penetration problem. It's called the Temkin ratings, Temkin. Talking about satisfaction with various customer experiences, not just retail, but any number of other sectors. Food and drug and mass market retailing always does outstanding. And so that's also, there's a big level of satisfaction with the shopping experience. I mean, it's not total, they still get frustrated with out of stocks and lack of good deals, etc. But in general, there's a very high level of satisfaction with the in-store purchasing experience. So that doesn't leave a whole lot of opportunity for e-commerce in general. And then here's just, if you want to see kind of the overall shares, I'll give you a rough estimate of where the sales are going. This is share of transactions again. Amazon, 44%. Now there's some sectors, I just did one, that they had like 85 share. So, I mean, they always seem to be #1, but in this one, similar to baby, Walmart and Target have a much bigger presence than in some of the other industries we've tracked. Now we look at organics. Everybody wants, it's huge, it's growing, it's big. Well, let's see how big it is. Let's see, well, would you guess that 8% of the people nationally buy organic personal care products? We did consumables, that number was 10. We've done a lot of research on organics, and I can tell you it's not mainstream, and it's not going mainstream anytime soon. It may be growing gradually, and there's some indication of that, but as far as kind of it exploding or being a big mainstream idea, it's not there. Now, that's not to say that there aren't segments and niches that really buy it in high numbers. And so you can see here's your vaunted millennials, yes, above average, heavy purchasing of organics. Mountain region, in fact, I think, isn't it Boulder that's kind of the hotbed and the epicenter of the organic universe? Blacks actually were above average. Here's a real interesting dynamic right here. That's 16% for heavy personal care buyers in general. Remember I mentioned that heavy personal care buyers just buy a lot of stuff. And one of the things we've always seen about organics, it's really unproductive in mass market. I mean, really, really slow moving. But what it is extremely high incrementality. So it's not a slam dunk that I just need to get rid of them because they're not productive, because they are so highly incremental. And this kind of provides the insight as to why. It's because these heavy personal care buyers are kind of allocating some of their purchases to organics. You offer them more stuff to buy, they're going to buy it. And organics is, could be a nice complementary line extension. Just buyers have to be aware. You need to make your buyers aware that it's not going to be a blockbuster as far as velocity, but it will be incremental. Now we look at heavy online shoppers. Why is e-commerce slow to get pickup in CPG for most sectors? Not all, but the vast majority. Well, again, not many people are heavy online shoppers for anything. So we ask, I consider myself a heavy online shopper for most products. So just in general, do I shop online for a lot of stuff? Only 12% of the people agreed with that. And that's consistent with the last study where we asked it in consumables where the number was 11. But again, there's these niches of people that are higher. One-person households actually is the highest, which I found interesting. The mountain region, 24%. So again, there's this inherent barrier. Not only is there the satisfaction of buying in store at most brick and mortars, but people just haven't caught on to heavy online buying in major numbers for this to catch on. So again, that's another kind of headwind that is holding back e-commerce sales in most sectors that we look at. This is interesting. Can't quite explain both aspects, but heavy incontinence buyers were the highest groups for both. Now, I can understand the online because there's an issue of privacy and, younger shoppers may be a bit embarrassed to buy it or whatever. Can't quite explain the organic, but I mean, certainly it's an interesting tidbit, and I'd be curious to hear if somebody had a little context on that. All I can do is present the data, provide some hypotheses, and, the real benefit comes if you're able to apply it to your own personal knowledge and kind of build out the story, our understanding. So we've kind of disproportionately, just like the media, obsessed over millennials and heavy online shopping and organics. So what's the confluence of all of that? Let's blend it all together. Well, we basically have nothing. We don't have a big market. It's 1.5% of all adults. So let's build this up. So through our survey, about 30% of the respondents were millennials, 70% were older. Here's how their purchasing breaks out. Here's the big blue is I don't either buy heavily online nor do I buy organic. The green is I buy heavily online, but I'm not an organic shopper. And here's the red is I buy organics, but I'm not a heavy online shopper. And the purple is both, that little sliver. Well, that sliver is even tinier for older people. So if you bounce those two together, here's the people that are heavy online shoppers, that buy organics, and that are millennials. That's 1.5% of total. But if I was to Google millennial organics or millennial online shopping or any variation of thereof, you'd see just a fire hose of stories about that. If I then Googled, families and their shopping or family groceries or young family grocery, it would be crickets. You'd find nothing. And it has this really pernicious effect on our industry. I just got done a couple of days ago talking to a client. They were ready to go full tilt into this major national launch in an organic position, the brand that they were ready to spend pretty heavily on in mainstream, not to go to natural food where it would probably have done quite well, because as we saw, there is a niche for that. But it was going to go mass market, and because they had bought into all the hype and just hadn't done the research to understand there's just not enough bodies to justify this, in a mass market set of, in your particular category. And that happens so often. I mean, it's becoming a real problem. And it's one thing if everything was fine in this industry, but it's not. We're at historically light sales growth. We see a lot of jobs being consolidated, a lot of people kind of getting moved out as industry consolidation, all addressing a soft industry, and we're kind of looking in the wrong places. We're trying to chase millennials that aren't the big business, and et cetera. So let's just summarize. It's a $40 billion category in personal care. As we define in this study, we could make an argument, and I think I'll have a point of view after I dig in a little bit deeper on whether we should include hair care and all these categories. I think kind of where I come down is like the value in mainstream hair care is probably more like personal care based on how frequently it's purchased, and all the premium hair care as well as these other two categories tend to act more like a beauty care category. But it's $30 billion if you take all those guys out. There's a lot of high penetration categories. It tends to be a traffic driver sector within HBC, but it's really the lower penetration ones that tend to drive even the most highest frequency. Walmart, the food retailers, and Target are the top 3 outlets, but dollar stores are very highly developed with an 8% share. E-commerce is only 3%, but still twice as high as what we saw in food, which is about 1.5%. Target appears to have forgotten that they're a mass marketer. I mean, they've spent so much time trying to kind of appeal to those vaunted millennials, and before that their guest was kind of the young moms. But I mean, they really bleed customers at the higher age groups. And you see these real skews that by income, by age, that they're pretty severe. And again, that's another retailer that's having struggles. They're seeing negative same-store sales, and one of the big areas is they're not appealing to the masses. Even their signature categories, which is baby, health and wellness, snack bars they talk about a lot, very niche, very kind of demographically focused, not broad-based categories. Walmart loses their #1 share position and lose it in a big way among heavy deal buyers, and many of them are migrating to CVS, Walgreens, and dollar stores. So that's why understanding deal preferences is important, particularly when you talk to your retail customers. That provides a framework and a shopper insight as to why aren't I getting my fair share? Why are my sales getting soft? Deal purchasing preferences are one of the big areas where that happens. We saw what a big driver that was for dollar stores. 90% of personal care buyers participate in at least one tactic, and on average it's 3.5 times regularly. But deal participation overall isn't as important in this sector as others we see, but it's still very important. Private label participation in particular, very low at 28%. So this is a brand-driven sector, and we see it across most of the categories that we looked at. Value brands have a solid market. 26% of the people find that they're important, and as I mentioned, a major driver of consumers in dollar stores. Shoppers under 45 years old are abandoning FSIs and circulars in droves, and it's very problematic. If you're a vendor in those two areas, you need to come up with a plan to diversify your business or something. And the interesting and somewhat problematic thing is nothing really seems to have taken its place as far as preferred deal tactics to these buyers. The less affluent shoppers opt for more passive tactics like EDLP and large sizes, bonus packs, private label, value brands. You saw that skew pretty consistent across all those tactics. And organics and heavy online shopping, still niche activities, despite what's being written in the press, despite all the money that's being invested in the space and all the kind of hype. There's just no data to support that they're big. And it's really incumbent, if I just get to one person to kind of reevaluate what you're doing in this area, that my job is done. I mean, I've seen a lot of initiatives from our clients run off the road because they felt like these were big markets, and they just aren't at this point. That's not to say people haven't been successful doing it, but they're usually doing it in a niche fashion or from a low base. So I can now again step off my soapbox. Thank everyone for attending again, and I'll toss it back to Dustin for questions.